today's debate will be between GoodFather and Footsoldier. GoodFather is taking the position that Bitcoin is an asset bubble, it is no future money, and you should not buy it. And Footsoldier is taking the opposition. The winner is decided either through concession or voting at the end. To both competitors, good luck.
Thanks.
Yeah,
good
so
Father. Go ahead.
I think there's a little bit of I can hear my own voice. Can you just mute while I'm talking?
Yeah, I've got push to talk, so it shouldn't be coming from me.
Okay, fine. Okay. So my proposition is, as stated, that I don't believe that Bitcoin is the future of money. I believe it's a big asset bubble, and the air is about to come out of it. And my reasoning for that is, as I see it, Bitcoin has no fundamental value. There's no I mean, it ignores all financial principles. I mean, if you should use it as money, it needs to have, I mean, look at gold, for example. Gold is a commodity, and that is what has made it a good currency for the last 5,000 years because it is in high demand. Bitcoin, on the other hand, is just a digital product which thousands of people can easily copy, and people have no reason to use it to pay for goods and services because their paycheck comes in dollars. So if they were to switch from using, say, dollars in America to use Bitcoin, they would have to pay out they would have to sell the Bitcoin as soon as a store received the money, and then pay out the wages in dollars because, yeah, I'm just repeating myself, but what I'm trying to say is that when you use Bitcoin to buy a service or product, that company that sells you the product and take the Bitcoin as payment will have to sell that Bitcoin to pay their employees in dollars or euros or yen, so that they can pay their employees and the employees can pay their taxes to the government, because the government won't accept Bitcoin as a form of payment. And I've often heard Bitcoiners say that they can just sell a portion of their Bitcoin to be able to pay their taxes to the government. But I mean, I think personally that would destroy the purpose of Bitcoin, because if you use two currencies at the same time, that's going to have some problems. And yeah, that was my introduction. I don't know if you have anything to say.
Yeah, I've got lots to say. You've raised a few points in there in your opening statement that I'd like to address as well. You said that it's a digital asset, so it's easy to copy. Well, I wish it was easy to copy. It's currently $9,000 per Bitcoin, and if I could copy it, I'd be a lot richer than I am today. But unfortunately, you can't copy it. That's the whole point of Bitcoin, that there's a blockchain and there's a public ledger in which the transactions are stored and publicly accessible. And if you tried to copy, I'm not like a super tech freak in terms of all of that, the technical details, but the whole point of Bitcoin is that it can't be copied, because even if you did somehow try and copy it, it wouldn't match up with the public blockchain. There'd be an obvious inconsistency, and then it would just stand out like a sore thumb.
I know what you're saying, but the issue I was trying to raise is there are thousands of cryptocurrencies who rely on the exact same business model, that you can have this digital gold, as they call it. And I mean, I think what you misinterpreted I was saying was that you can physically copy Bitcoin and make a infinite amount of Bitcoins. That wasn't what I was trying to say. So.
All right. Okay. I understand then. So you meant that not that you can just print Bitcoin yourself, but rather that you
dollars.
That rather you can just have an alternative Bitcoin like Ethereum, Litecoin.
Yeah, exactly. Alternative cryptocurrencies. And therefore it doesn't really stand out. I mean,
Yeah. Well, you've got many different types of fiat currency. I've currently got cash in my house right now. I've currently got Hungarian forints. I've got Thai baht. I've got euros. I've got pounds. I think I've got maybe 5 or 6 currencies just in my house. So there's competition in terms of currencies, and the way the
Yeah, the only
forex
reason
market.
that you know you'll be able to go to a store in those countries and use those money is because those governments guarantee that currency.
Right, but the thing is, it's all just belief that it is a store of value, because the dollar was moved off of the gold standard years and years and years ago. The dollars aren't backed by gold. Dollars are just paper, right? But everyone knows that if they have a dollar, they can buy something with it. Probably you can't buy that much with $1 today, but yeah, if you've got cash notes, it's just paper. It's not backed by and it's just the paper it's printed on. I think the like just the value to print the dollar, I think, is more expensive than the actual paper, the value of the paper or something, right? So it's got no real tangible value to it.
No, I agree that the currency don't have any real value, just a piece of paper, because most countries have gone off the gold standard. But
Right.
as Adam Smith said, money is not supposed to be an asset. It's just supposed to be the means of which that you can exchange goods,
Right.
something along those lines.
So then we need to talk about using money as an instrument to accomplish a certain goal. So if everyone thought, oh well, money is just paper, US dollars are just paper, it's got no value, then the same thing that the same criticism that you're trying to levy at Bitcoin applies to fiat currency. So the what Bitcoin is backed by is the faith that other people find it valuable. It's a community of understanding of the value, a communal recognition of the value of the Bitcoin in exactly the same way as the US dollar. And because if no
It's
one had
more
faith,
cult than a community.
sorry, oh,
It's
cult,
more, yeah.
yeah. Well, it's just the scale of things. So when there's only a few 100,000 people, let's say, involved, then maybe you call it a cult. When it's a few 100 million people involved, then it's a global currency. And it's the difference between a murderer and a conqueror, and these types of things. It's like you're doing the same thing, but you're just seeing it on a different scale. So I really think that saying, "Oh, it's not backed by anything," well, then you're just going to have a reductio, because the US dollar and British sterling and Thai baht and every other currency around the world um, that I've got here, I've got in my wallet, it's just paper. But we know that it's more than just paper, because you recognize it as something. Even if you're in Denmark, if I came around to your house with a briefcase of Thai baht, but millions and millions of what's the Danish krona? Is it Danish krona? Yeah, worth like millions and millions and millions. Are you just going to be like, oh no, that's not my national currency, I don't care about that? No, you take it and be like, thank you, and you change it into a currency that you actually do want. So although you don't recognize it as your own currency, you see the value in it because it's honored someone else.
Yeah, I know. I agree that it's not that the paper itself has much value, it's that the belief in it. But there's a reason why we believe the dollar, the euro, the yen has value, and it's because it's backed by those governments. There's no reason to believe that Bitcoin has any purchasing power. I mean that faith in the Bitcoin could easily dwindle. I mean, there's no reason to have it in the first place.
Well, the faith in the US dollar could easily dwindle, and the faith in the currency of Lebanon is dwindling before our eyes, and people in Lebanon are putting their life savings rather into Bitcoin than leaving it in the banks in Lebanon. So,
I mean,
go
yeah,
ahead.
I mean, I guess people in Lebanon are not so smart, but yeah, sure, it's right that people could lose faith in the currency usually because of government incompetence. But that doesn't justify putting your money into Bitcoin, because that's even worse than having it in a fiat currency.
Well,
I
look,
mean, you're basically just going from one fiat currency to another if you take your dollars and convert it into Bitcoin.
well, look, let's say I get all my money and put it into gold bars, and I put it into gold bars because I know that gold is an asset and gold is valuable. There's only a limited amount of gold, and people are always going to want gold. But what happens if no one really wants gold anymore? What happens if people decided, oh, well, we've got better industrial replacements than using gold in technical diaphragms and these technical applications, and we don't really need gold in an industrial sense anymore. And jewelry, no one really likes golden jewelry anymore. It looks sort of old-fashioned. We don't really like that anymore. We
There's
like,
gold in your phones. I mean, gold is used used at many things. I mean,
yeah.
there are a
Let's
lot of
say,
things. There are a lot of things where gold will actually be superior to use, but because it's so expensive, they use other inferior materials. I mean, gold is actually a commodity. It's both in demand because it can be used in jewelry because it's rare, and because it's used in technology. I mean, it has an actual use.
yeah, but this is exactly what I was just saying. What happens if we find materials which are superior to gold in industrial applications, so we don't really need to use gold as much anymore, and people don't really like the look of gold so much anymore? It's a more niche desire to have gold jewelry.
Sure,
Then what we're going to
that's
see,
possible. I mean, hypothetically, that would be possible. But gold has proven to be stable money for the past 5,000 years. Bitcoin has only been in the existence for the last 13 years.
right? But Bitcoin has proven to be an extremely well-performing asset
It hasn't.
over. It has. It's currently 19,000 US dollars per
Yeah, all
Bitcoin.
bubbles have to come to an end.
Well, if you had bought Bitcoin just 1 year ago, you would have had an incredible performing asset versus I think it's outperformed pretty much every other asset on the stock market that
Yeah, I mean,
I
it's
know
a
of.
pretty big bubble. I'm not denying that.
Yeah, but at some point,
I mean,
you're
if you had
gonna have to.
bought tech stocks in 1995 and sold them in 2000, you'd also made lots of money.
Yeah,
But that doesn't change the fact that it's a bubble.
but you would have made more money in less time with Bitcoin. So,
I'm not
okay,
denying that
so
you can
you're
make
saying,
lots of money with it, but you cannot ignore the fact that it is a bubble. Bitcoin has no fundamental value. It doesn't really have any purchasing power. Mention a store where you can use Bitcoin as a payment.
there's many places where you can use
Sure,
Bitcoin as a
I
payment. You
mean
can
there
use
might
Bitcoin.
be, but mention one.
Yeah, like web hosting websites you can use as payments. Even 50 Cent was selling his album back in the day with Bitcoin. Actually, it's quite hilarious because had he kept it, he would have been significantly richer. He would have probably been one of the richest people in the world, if not the richest person in the world, if he kept all that money from his album sales back in the day. But yeah, many people have put stuff up for sale with Bitcoin. But the thing that you seem to be missing here is Bitcoin. You're assuming um, you're falsely assuming that Bitcoin is supposed to be used for going to Starbucks and buying a coffee. It's not. Bitcoin is generally seen as a storage of wealth, a storage of value, and it does that
You're the first
incredibly well.
person I've ever heard to say that. I mean, I thought the idea was always to be for it to be the future of money, so that you can
Not
ditch all fiat currencies and get independence from the government.
No, not really, because there's so many other altcoins which have been designed for that task. Like for example, Ripple. The transaction speed of Ripple is exceptionally fast, and if I want to make a transaction immediately right now, I use Ripple. Um, and Ripple's fantastic, but it's not the same type of thing. Even Litecoin, fantastic. It's not the same type of thing as Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is the ultimate crypto asset for storage of wealth. People don't use that to make little transactions, especially now the fact that one Bitcoin is 19,000. We in the future we're just going to be talking exclusively in Satoshis because it's such a large unit now.
Yeah, I mean, housing was also a good storage of wealth in the mid 2000s and late to mid 2000s.
Housing
wasn't.
Housing historically has always been a good, and it still is a good storage of wealth. In fact, property investing is still one of the premier wealth generation assets.
Yeah, I know, but like Bitcoin now, people in the mid late 2000s was basically ignoring the fundamentals of investing. Their investing was based on the assumption that it would continue to go upwards and that it would continue to be bullish, but completely ignoring the financials behind the investment, even though it might be losing them thousands of dollars a month. They still thought it would be a good long-term investment, and history basically proved them wrong.
Well,
I mean, housing prices have recovered more or less, but at the time it was completely foolish to buy properties. It's completely foolish to buy Bitcoin now.
I just completely disagree, because if you look at gold, for example, if you'd have bought gold in 2012, let's even say, if you go a bit further back, if you bought gold in 2011 and then sold it in 2015, you would have made a loss, a huge loss. You would have halved the amount of money. You would have bought maybe for $1,000 and sold for 500. You would have lost huge amounts of money. Every asset fluctuates. The housing market fluctuates. There's boom and bust cycles. It doesn't prevent it being the premier historic wealth asset. Gold, real estate, these things are historically the premier storages or financial storage mechanisms for wealth.
Okay, so Bitcoin is a good store of value. What exactly is the value about it?
Well, the value currently is 19,500.
No, where does the value come from? I can see the numbers. I'm not an idiot.
The value comes from the recognition, and exactly the same way that the US dollar, the value.
Yeah, I
comes
mean,
from
people also recognize that Dutch tulips were worth a lot in the 17th century.
So, sorry, what was the point?
Dutch tulips. Have you ever heard of?
Oh yeah, tulip mania. Yeah, sure. But the thing is with tulips is, I can just go and grow a tulip, and so there is some base value of a tulip, and that's the agricultural cost of a unit of tulip, which is very, very cheap. So that's why tulip mania was a mania, because there was an overinflation in a hilarious, delusional overinflation of the value of tulips when they can just easily be grown. Bitcoin can't easily be duplicated or print more of it. It's finite, and the supply is getting smaller and smaller. And before, in the next few years, I don't know how many years, maybe the next decade.
I mean, I have heard the argument that every 4 years the supply of Bitcoin is halved, but it doesn't matter what the supply of Bitcoin is. I mean, I would actually be ready to argue that tulips have more value than Bitcoin. I mean, as I understood it, the argument for Bitcoin was always that it could be hidden from the government and you could use it to make transactions.
Well, it just
But you're
seems
saying that it's a store of value. I mean,
it just seems you have many faulty
it seems
assumptions.
to contradict itself.
It seems you have many false assumptions about Bitcoin. None of these things necessarily have to be the case. Like, it doesn't have to be the case that you have to use Bitcoin for illegal purposes. It doesn't necessarily have to be the case that you need to pay Starbucks with Bitcoin when you buy a coffee.
No, but you can't really use Bitcoin for much other than just having it in your wallet or using it for legal transactions.
But
because
even,
you can't go down to the supermarket and buy a loaf of bread of Bitcoin.
Yeah, sure, but that in the future maybe you can. In some places today, maybe, or you definitely can. In some stores today, you can buy stuff with Bitcoin. But even, let's even say, okay, that's fine. We don't need that. Even just as a storage of wealth, Bitcoin is incredible, because I've put some of my money into Bitcoin, and not only has it stored that wealth that I put into Bitcoin completely, it's also increased in the wealth that I stored. So
It
instead of
will prove you
like
wrong.
I think I've had something. I don't know. It's probably since the last time I've been bought Bitcoin. It's been about 4x, which I bought Bitcoin about a year ago or something last time, and it's been I would have made more money in Tesla, but you can say that Tesla is a
Yeah,
bubble.
Tesla is also a bad investment if you're going to talk about that.
Yeah, I don't think Tesla's a bad investment. I think Tesla's a bit overhyped right now, but I see the potential of the company, so it's a bit off
With a
topic.
PE of 1,000,
Sorry?
it has a PE ratio of 1,000. Oh, sorry, 807.
Yeah, it's
A bit overvalued.
definitely too expensive. Yeah,
The average
it's too
company has a
expensive.
PE ratio of 15.
Yeah, it's a bit expensive right now. It's a bit speculative right now, but the delivering huge, absolutely amazing technology, and it's involved. Like Elon Musk is involved in various
I mean,
projects in like
car
aerospace with the US
manufacturing is one of
government,
the
and
most competitive industries. I
yeah,
mean, if
yeah,
you look
but
at the net income to total revenue, you'll see that it's below 10%, maybe even below 5% for car companies. But
look how
not to
much.
get too much off track, we were talking about Bitcoin, and
Yeah,
you said
sure,
that it's a good store of value for you. I mean,
for everyone.
if you'd put your money in tech stocks in the mid to late 1990s, you also have said after you, oh, this is a great investment, great store of value. I've tripled my money over the past year. You should really buy those stocks. But people were just ignoring the fundamentals that these companies were basically were not earning any money. They were losing money, and they were having PE ratios of around 300. But still, I would rather buy those overvalued tech companies than I would buy Bitcoin, because
So really,
unlike tech companies, Bitcoin doesn't pay a dividend. Bitcoin doesn't really have a business. It doesn't produce any value for society.
well, I'm just looking at McDonald's. So McDonald's is like the classic one. If I had bought McDonald's in 1970, or something, I'm just looking at the amount of gains you would have had there. So going back, my graph goes back to 1973. So 50 in 1974, it dipped down to around, let's just round it down, say it's about 50 cents. You could have bought it in the mid 70s. It was about 50 cents, and now it's $210. So what is that? Almost 50 years ago, it's gone from 50 cents to $210. Well,
Yeah,
Bitcoin,
it's a great company.
yeah, but now let's have a look at Bitcoin. Bitcoin's gone within a decade. It's gone from about 20 cents to $20,000. So that's a bit more than McDonald's has done in a lot shorter space of time. So if you're saying that it's not a good storage of value, or that's like,
You know, from the 1/12, tulips went from 10, 10 dollars worth to all the way in February the 3rd being worth 200. Great store value.
right, but the thing is, the tulip mania, as I already explained, there was an underlying base value of a tulip. I can just grow a tulip.
Yeah, and there's no value of Bitcoin, no underlying value.
Well, there's no underlying value to anything unless it's a market. You do understand what a market is, right? A financial market is a place where buyers and sellers meet to exchange, right? And if
Yeah,
there's
I
no
know that.
buyers or there are no sellers, you don't have a market. You can't have a market with only buyers or a market with only sellers, because there's no market that way. A market has to be buyers and sellers. And so if you have buyers and sellers and you have a market surrounding an asset, then there is a value to something by definition. So to say that Bitcoin has no value is just incorrect. You can't say that Bitcoin has no value because it has a value approximately $20,000 worth per Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, it might have a current value of that, but I continue to believe that it has no fundamental value. And as John Law stated in the early 1700s, money is not the value for which goods are exchanged, but the value by which they exchange. But if money is the value by which they exchange, there need to be some fundamental value to it. And he proposed in the early 1700s where people were still using gold coins or silver coins as a payment method. He supposed that they made a paper which were backed by commodities like silver or gold or other metals. But Bitcoin has no value. Like the dollar doesn't have any value either, or the euro or the yen for that matter. But they at least have a government that backs it, a government that sells a lot of goods and that has a large GDP because they export and import a lot of goods every year and sell a lot of services. So I mean, I think we're just arguing the same thing all the time. We're just disagreeing. We're not coming to a consensus.
But it just seems that you're fundamentally mistaken about financial markets and assets. Because if I
know lots about financial markets.
If I take something like a Rolex watch, the Rolex watch has value because other people identify the Rolex as being valuable, and they're willing to pay a certain amount of money for that item.
Demand.
Right. There's a supply of Rolexes, there's a demand for Rolexes, there's buyers, there's sellers, there's a market for
Supply
Rolex.
creates demand.
Right. So you've got a market for Rolexes. But what fundamental, actual, tangible value does a Rolex have? Like, are you going to say the time telling is better than my computer? Well, no, it's not. Are you going to say that it's somehow like it has some utility to me or something? The same with gold. You can say, okay, well, if there was no industrial utility to gold and everyone didn't like it as a fashion statement, gold would be it would be rare, but it would be worthless. There's plenty of things that are rare. Like, for example, there are metals which are very rare and quite expensive, but most people don't really care about them or have a use for them. Like, not everything that there's tangible things which actually have negative value. For example, if you had like a roof.
Can I answer your
with
first
asbestos,
question?
well, it's all sort of part of the same thing. But I was just going to say that you could have an asbestos roof which has a negative value, right? So not all assets have positive values that are tangible.
Okay, to answer your question about the Rolex watch, the reason the Rolex watch is in demand is because the supply is very low, and it's not very easy to get your hands on it. So because the supply is low and the demand is high, it has high prices, and the demand comes from the fact that these watches are made out of, I assume, expensive materials, and the fact that the brand has built a name for itself. I mean, yeah, as you mentioned, that is supply and demand. That is how markets works. And can you repeat your other question?
Well, I was just saying, to tie in with the Rolex point, you've got a tangible asset, which is a Rolex, which is very expensive, but then you've got an asbestos roof, which is a tangible asset, but which has a negative value. People will pay you to take it away. Like, the same as what happened with oil not too long ago, with the futures market tanked below zero. People were actually getting paid to take oil because the oversupply was such that the price fell through zero and went negative.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter just because something's you said, a Rolex, there's a limited supply of Rolexes, therefore it has a higher value. That's not necessarily the case that something's rare, therefore it has a high value. Like, my piss is quite rare because only I produce it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it has a high value. It has to also be desired by someone. It has to have buyers. A market.
I mean, that's true. I don't
sellers.
disagree on you with that.
Right. So then your explanation of a Rolex watch having value just being linked to its rarity is incorrect because my piss is
it's
also
a
rare.
physical product that you can wear.
Yeah, but you could bottle my piss and wear it on a necklace in a little glass vial or something like that. You can wear whatever you want. You could wear uranium and die from it. It doesn't matter what you wear. It has nothing to do with the value. The only thing that's important for the value is a market with buyers and sellers. And Bitcoin has a market with buyers and sellers. And the market currently deems Bitcoin to have a worth of around $20,000 US.
Yeah,
If
that
people,
is correct. The market does deem it to have a value of $20,000, but that doesn't mean that it is necessarily an asset bubble, which I believe, and it doesn't mean that it doesn't have any fundamental value either, because while it might be in high
it does have value.
while it might be in high demand, that just doesn't give it any fundamental value. As a company, for example, it might be, let's just say hypothetically, desired by no one. But if it is selling a product or providing a service, it and making money every year, it has fundamental value, but it doesn't have any value on the market. That's just an example.
Okay, well, let's think about a company. All they do, they make money. They've got shareholders who they pay dividends to, and all they do to make money is trade Bitcoin. Does that company have fundamental value?
So you're saying that they work as a third party who distributes Bitcoin?
No, they just trade Bitcoin on the market. They do swing trading. They buy and sell. They buy low and sell high.
The only thing they do is buy and sell.
Sorry?
So the only thing they do is like they day trade Bitcoin. That's what you're asking, if that company has value.
Yeah.
That is an interesting question. I would say that if you just look at other day traders who trade assets on a daily basis, that they don't necessarily create any value, because the purpose of investing is to lend money to a company in exchange for a percentage of that company. So if the company does well, you own a part of it and can therefore sell it at a win. So I would probably say no, it doesn't give any value.
Right, so I could come up with a whole bunch of companies then, based on your view, that don't have any value. Even if the fundamentals, the technical fundamentals of the company were strong, and everyone else would say the company has good fundamental value, you would then say that the company doesn't have fundamental value because they're not providing some kind of tangible service. But then I could even go further.
I'm saying that if they day trade Bitcoin, they don't create any value.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think they provide liquidity to the markets. But anyway, let's come up with a company.
Liquidity to who?
Or to the market itself, to create liquidity. Low liquidity markets are sort of
in the cryptocurrency market, on markets in general.
Markets in general, you don't want to trade a low liquidity market because you can't really get out of a trade so quick. Creating liquidity in a market is generally seen as a good thing. But anyway, we can think of a company that does nothing, right? It does nothing of service to anyone. It pollutes the environment. It doesn't provide any.
I actually read. I think it was Keynes, the economist. He said that you would stimulate an economy or create value by having the government dig down money in the ground and then selling that property to a company and make them dig it up. And he's basically said that would give value. But while a company might make make money, say if they buy the land for $10, they pay somebody $5 to dig it up, and there's $20 at the ground. That doesn't create any value. While on paper there might have been created value because the company earned $5. That doesn't mean that it creates any value for society, because those dollars were just stuck down by the government. They don't produce anything for anyone or provide any services.
Okay, well, I don't fully understand the Keynesian economic point there, how it relates to the conversation. But anyway, I think we should start wrapping up the conversation. So what I'm going to do now is sort of
Closing arguments.
I'm going to go over the debate, where we are in the debate, and how I see the proposition. So I see the proposition as a conjunction of three propositions, right? So Bitcoin is an asset bubble, it is not future money, and you should not buy it. So I only actually require a concession on one of those points to get a concession on a debate proposition, as it is conjunction. I would not try and argue about it being future money, because I don't care whether it's future money or not, and I wouldn't even say it needs to be used as future money for it to be good. So I don't really care about that one. You should not buy it. What if I just want to buy it? Is there some cosmic reason in the universe somewhere preventing me from buying it, or God is going to be annoyed or something? I don't think so. If I just want to buy it to gamble, even if I lose money, I'm still able to buy it. So I'd say that is
Shouldn't buy it because
indefensible.
it's a bad investment, if you can even call it an investment. It's more of speculation.
Sure, but if I want to speculate for fun, it doesn't mean I shouldn't buy it. So strictly speaking, I wouldn't even.
I mean, sure, you could argue the same thing about lottery tickets. I could say you shouldn't buy lottery tickets because statistically you won't make any value, you'll just lose value over time. But you could just argue, well, sure, I mean, it's my money, I can speculate, why shouldn't I buy it?
Right, well, I could just say that I get enjoyment out of buying lottery tickets, despite the fact that I know that I won't win. Right, so that, like, it doesn't mean that I shouldn't buy it.
I mean, you could get enjoyment about burning money, but
yeah, but there's no
I can
cosmic
still argue
compulsion.
that you shouldn't do it.
There's no cosmic compulsion preventing me from buying Bitcoin or doing any of these things. So I think so I would say not future money. I don't care. You shouldn't buy it. It's indefensible as a proposition. And the last one, Bitcoin is an asset bubble. I'm now gonna push a bit more on this point, because I felt like we had a nice conversation talking about stuff, but I just want to close it up now. So in order to call something an asset bubble, you're either gonna have to call it a bubble because it's not. There's a base price, for example, of the tulips, at which the price currently is far in excess of. But with Bitcoin, this isn't the case. With Bitcoin,
any valuation of a series of cryptocurrencies, or just Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies general, I would consider a bubble.
right? So then you would consider all fiat currency bubbles as well, which is a reductio of your position.
No, because fiat currencies, they are valued by which goods are exchanged, as I mentioned earlier. John Law quoted. Basically, money, dollars or euro, yen, they are the instrument you use to exchange goods and services. And Bitcoin doesn't have that function because you can't use it to buy most services or buy most products.
I can use it to exchange value with anyone who acknowledges Bitcoin, or wants to have Bitcoin, or wants to sell Bitcoin. There's a market for Bitcoin. So if I want to buy something using Bitcoin and the seller agrees, then I can do that. There's nothing prohibiting me from doing that. But it doesn't even matter whether I can buy a Starbucks with Bitcoin or not. Like,
No, because money is not the value for which goods are exchanged.
Well, look, Bitcoin is a storer of wealth, storer of value, and it's done remarkably well.
Okay, I will say, I will close this by saying this. You might be right today, but a year from now, maybe 2 years from now, will you be right? When Bitcoin eventually bursts, I will just want you to remember this moment and just think, well, he was right in the end.
Right,
That's
but that's
all
what
I'm
they were
asking
saying.
for.
That's what they were saying in 2014, and the price of Bitcoin, I think, was below 1,000. But anyway,
I mean, rather be early than too late.
right. But let's. Oh, I've bought my Bitcoin first in 2017, summer 2017. So I was earlier than now, but it was many
No, I
people
mean
earlier.
earlier calling out the bubble than too late calling out the bubble.
Yes and no. If you watch the markets, I'd rather.
I mean, Michael Burry found out that the housing market was big bubble all the way back in 2003, and just because it took it 5 years to burst didn't it mean that he was wrong all the way until the bubble eventually burst?
Yeah, but a broken clock is right twice a day. Like you can scream housing market crash 5 years in advance, and approximately once every 10 years the housing market does come down
No,
anyway.
it's
So you're going to
every
be right
18
sooner or
years.
later.
You're wrong. It's every 18 years.
Well, no, on average, house
On
prices.
average, the stock market bursts every 10 years. On average, the housing market bursts every 18 years.
In what country? You can't just say that. It's just generally over time. It might be 5
Globally.
years, it might be 50 years.
It
At
was,
some point,
I said globally, 18 years on average. It was
okay.
it was 87 in America, and then 22 years later, it was 2008.
Yeah, if we take an average since medieval times of the value of real estate, all I'm saying about this, I don't care if it was 18 years, whether it's 10 years or 11 years. That's not what I was trying to say. What I'm saying is, sooner or later, there's a housing market correction, and sooner or later, the value of real estate doubles. In the UK, over the last, I don't know, 5, 10 decades, it's doubled somewhere in the region of once every 10 years. The housing market, um, generally mostly led by inflation, but also led by desirability and other factors. But the housing market
Yeah, I mean,
always has little crashes, little corrections, and booms. It's a boom and bust thing. It's a cycle. It's cyclical. It happens all the time. So you can
it's
call.
funny you say it that you have to adjust it for inflation, because if you measure the price of an asset in gold, it gives you a better perspective of the historical value, because then you won't have to adjust it for inflation, because gold is a hedge against inflation.
Yeah, but gold can also fluctuate in its value. We saw that gold lose a lot of value from 2013 or something to 2015, whereas inflation
In
still occurred.
accordance
There
to
wasn't
the
deflation.
what were they using? What do people usually use to measure the price of gold?
Or fiat generally, but there wasn't deflation on fiat. There was inflation on fiat. So the price of gold should have increased, but it didn't. It decreased. So gold fluctuates in prices as well as any other asset.
I think you misheard. I think you didn't quite hear me. I
Say it again.
said that usually people measure the price of gold in dollars which there are printed trillions and trillions and trillions of uh multiple times. I mean, that happened in 2009, 10 and 11 with quantitative easing, and it's happening again here in 2020.
You can measure gold in pounds. You can measure gold in euros. You can measure gold in all sorts. Of course, if you live in the UK, you're not going to go to the gold merchant and say, what's the price in dollars? You might do, but you're going to say, what's the price in pounds? And there was a very tight correlation between dollars, pounds, and euros on gold. But anyway, to wrap it up, you're saying that Bitcoin is currently in a bubble, but the thing is, with a bubble, unless there is some obvious fundamental base price of an asset which you can point to and call out, you can only call a bubble status in retrospect. You can only say retrospectively, this was a bubble, because otherwise you would be predicting the crash. But you can't say with certainty, unless you've got a crystal ball which functions 100% accurately, you can't say with certainty that Bitcoin will crash or Bitcoin will go to 10,000 or 5,000 or go to zero. You can't say that. Bitcoin might go to 1 million and stay there for the next 100 years. Because you can't call that with certainty, you can only assess it being a bubble in retrospect. So, in that sense, unless you're going to try and say something about the base underlying asset, which is going to be very dubious, you can't actually call it a bubble, because by doing so, it's just a mistake.
I mean, you can make that argument that I can't label it as a bubble because, as you mentioned, that with the retrospect. Sorry, I'm stumbling over my words. You might be right that I can't label this as a bubble, but that doesn't mean that this asset is very, very inflated and it still doesn't have any fundamental value. I mean, it's not a store of value because it doesn't have any value. The only value it has is the demand people have for it. I mean, the value comes from the demand of the asset. It doesn't come from the fundamentals. I mean, when you buy real estate, you can rent that property out and earn cash flow. That is what gives real estate fundamental values, because you can earn money off of it.
Okay,
It
can
is
I rent?
it,
Can I rent
yeah,
out my real estate in Syria during a war?
yeah.
Well, so when there's like bombshells through the roof and it's like there's war and there's people going around the streets with assault rifles killing each other, what sort of price do you think I'm going to get for my rental property in Syria?
It's probably going to go down a lot, but I think that's
Right,
obvious to anyone. You really
right, but
didn't have to
exactly. So that's
ask
why.
that question.
No, I'm just pointing out that even with real estate, historically considered the safest store of a value, it still depends on the area or the location. If you've got a house in San Francisco, for example, which is worth $5 million, but then there's an earthquake which rips through the half of it because there's predicted some massive earthquake in California was about to happen, and it's going to cut right through San Francisco as far as I can remember. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure that's correct.
Yeah, I mean,
But
if your gold bar is hit by, a bomb and it just completely dis- disappears, is annihilated. I don't know what to say. I mean, it doesn't really have any value either because it doesn't exist. I'm not really sure what your point is.
my point is that every single asset can depreciate or increase in value. It can store value and it can fail to store value. And everything is just based upon a market, buyers and sellers. If you don't have a market, you can't buy and sell anything. So it only has value maybe to you in terms of you like the look of something, or you can use it to eat because there's no other humans in your area, and you've got value because you can eat it or something like this. But in terms of something holding value in an economic sense, the only way that anything ever stores value in an economic sense is if there's a market for it. Because you could have one thing, which is real estate in Syria, where there's not a war, and it stores value very well because people want to live there, so it's very valuable. And then there can be a war come along, and it's not very valuable anymore. You can't sell it to anyone because there's not a market. No one's buying real estate in Syria because there's a war
Yeah,
there.
but what usually gives it an asset value is the underlying business in a stock, for example. The stock isn't just worth something because people want a piece of paper that says they own 10 stocks in Coca-Cola. It's because they know they own a part of a company that sells a popular product and they can earn a dividend on it.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure. Yeah, sure. If it didn't pay a dividend, then it's going to be worthless. But it's not going to be worthless. It's going to be worth less because you can still hold it. And there's very popular. I can't bother to Google it, but you could just Google it yourself. There's very popular companies where there's
that is what gives an asset value. I mean,
yeah,
The
but there's
only
plenty
the
of
only thing that in Bitcoin's eyes give Bitcoin value is that it's that the government can't take it away from you. I mean, that's the only thing. I suppose the
yeah. Well,
government can't take your gold coins and RuneScape away from you, but that doesn't mean that RuneScape coins have a lot of value.
yeah, well, that's something different. But there's all sorts of things that you wouldn't think have lots of value, but do, like Pokemon cards. I just googled it. Amazon don't pay a dividend, but plenty of people buy Amazon stock. Why? Because they can buy it and they hope to sell it at a higher price. And because there's a market for it, there's buyers and sellers, so it has value
The
because
only
it's
reason
traded.
there's a market for Amazon stocks is because there's an underlying company that's actually worth something, that actually provides a service.
They don't pay a dividend though. So when you're saying that the only reason why someone buys a stock is because of dividend, that's incorrect because people buy lots of stock.
Well,
I buy lots.
I don't believe that. What I said it might have been, but then I will correct it. I mean, I don't think that the only reason that the stock has value is because it pays a dividend. I mean, you can have a company that earns billions and billions each year and doesn't pay any dividend, and it still has value because it's a great company.
Right.
I mean, a stock is just that you own a part of the company. Just because you aren't getting paid a dividend, that doesn't mean that it has any value. That it doesn't have any value.
Okay, well, let's wrap it up. Let's go through the points as quickly. So, do you agree that if I just want to gamble my money, for example, even if I lose my money, do you agree that there's nothing preventing me, nothing in the universe cosmically preventing me from buying Bitcoin in some sort of cosmic?
I wasn't arguing that you can't buy Bitcoin. I was arguing that you shouldn't.
Right, but is there
Like I would argue that you shouldn't buy lottery tickets.
Right, but is there anything, any cosmic compulsion or anything that would motivate me? You could argue here from the perspective of there's a God who will be upset if I buy Bitcoin, or you could say something like that. But unless you say something like that, is there anything, any reason why I shouldn't if I want to?
You should most likely lose your money if you keep it there over long periods of time, or you
What
will
if my
lose your
goal is
money.
to? What if my goal is to lose money and it makes me happy? Should I not buy it?
If your goal is to lose money, then buy as much Bitcoin as you can.
Right, so that we should remove that part of the conjunction. So that's already concession of the debate, but let's just continue anyway.
No, I'm not conceding anything because I
Okay.
said that you shouldn't buy it, not that you can't buy it.
Yeah, but if I want to, for example, let's say I think that Bitcoin is going to lose me money, and I want to lose money, and I buy a Bitcoin. But you come along and say, no, you shouldn't buy Bitcoin. I'm like, why? I want to lose money, and I think Bitcoin's going to lose me money. And you say, yeah, I think Bitcoin will lose you money. So I'm like, oh, well, why shouldn't I buy it then?
Okay, then I can change the proposition. You shouldn't buy money.
No, you can't change the proposition at the end of the debate when I'm trying to get to closing statements. So we concede that. The next one is not future money. I don't actually care if it's future money or not. So I'm just going to skip that because I don't even, that's inconsequential because I think it's a store of value and not necessarily future money. Although I could debate that if I wanted to, but I'm not going to. I don't need to. And the third one, Bitcoin is an asset bubble. Do you concede that it's only possible to call an asset a bubble if the future price is known, i.e., there is an underlying base price like a tulip, or it's impossible to call something an asset?
There is no fixed underlying base price. I mean, the price,
Right.
the cost of an asset comes from supply and demand, and in a bubble, there's a lot of demand, which is usually not justified by the fundamentals. So I wouldn't entirely agree.
Right, so it's not like a tulip. You're saying there's no underlying base value that it could revert to. Right, so then it's just the value, the market price, the value that people are willing to sell it for and to buy it for. So in order to call it a bubble, that means you have to possess future knowledge of the market price. And do you possess future knowledge of the market price?
No, I don't agree with you with that.
How is it possible to know that it's a bubble without possessing future knowledge of the market price?
I mean, what is the definition of a bubble?
That it's an overinflated price, which is about to crash. It's going to crash imminently because the price is unjustified for the actual value.
I'm just trying to find it on the dictionary. But so what did you say? What was your definition?
Well, I just went off the top of my head, but we can just like Google something here. An asset bubble is when assets such as housing stocks or gold dramatically rise in price over a short period that is not supported by the value of the product. The hallmark of a bubble is irrational exuberance, a phenomenon when everyone is buying up a particular asset. With Bitcoin, this doesn't really seem to be the case, although it does rise and fall in value very quickly.
I mean, sure, you might have gotten me there, because if the definition of a bubble is that it's has increased sharply in price, which is not justified by the fundamentals, then sure, I'll have to concede, because Bitcoin doesn't have any fundamental value.
Well, the value of Bitcoin is the value that people are willing to pay for it, and willing to trade it in a market. And the market price is currently around
The price
20,000.
of it.
Right. So the
The
value,
price of it is based on the demand, supply and demand.
yeah, the market price.
So I will concede that you can't label it as an asset bubble if the definition of an asset bubble is an asset that has risen sharply in price, which isn't justified by the fundamentals. And the reason I'll have to concede that is because Bitcoin doesn't have any fundamental value.
I could say that Tesla might be in a bit of a bubble right now, for example. But even if I'm charitable and I say,
Yeah, but Tesla does have some fundamental value, so you could call that an asset bubble.
Right, yeah, Tesla does have fundamental value in terms of tangible.
They produce a form of transport. Yeah, cars that you can
It's got
transport yourself.
It's got tangible production, so we can value this. We can look at how much income they're generating as a company, and we can form a valuation based upon their revenue. We could do their company valuation is 10 times.
Valuation is based on what they're currently earning and the prospects for future earnings.
Yeah, right. We could just say that their valuation, just pick a number out the hat, 10 times their projected income for the year, or something like that, is the value of the company, something like this. But with Bitcoin, you can't really do that because it's not a company. It's a different type of asset. So
no, it's not the fact. It's not the fact that it's not a company. I mean, a mortgage-backed security can have fundamental value. It's the fact that it's just a digital. I mean, a digital money? I mean,
you can have many things that are digital. Most of our money, fiat money today, is digital.
Yeah, I mean, when
Doesn't
you use print
digital.
money, it just types it in on a computer.
Yeah, exactly. Like most things are digital nowadays, apart from gold. Or even gold is digital as it's stored in, represented in bank accounts or in asset savings and stuff.
I mean, you can still
physical
trade
assets.
gold like physically, like hand you a gold bar in.
Yeah, you can like physically
But
transport a gold bar,
wouldn't
but
be able to physically transport Bitcoin.
yeah, sure. But I've actually never physically exchanged gold, but I've exchanged gold plenty of times digitally.
That doesn't mean it isn't possible.
Yeah, I know, but I was just saying that just because something's digital, it doesn't necessarily mean something. It doesn't mean it's worthless or something. Anyway, so I don't want to do a gotcha with the definition. I want to agree that a bubble is when you look at a chart and you see the price goes apeshit, and you're like, why is the price going like this? There's no reason for it to go like this. It's just market exuberance, like the tulip mania, like all of these things. That is what a bubble is, right? With Bitcoin, we're not really seeing that. You could have said that Bitcoin was in a bubble in 2018. Was it 2018? Yeah, the end of 2018, I think it was. And then it did crash. So it was sort of in a bubble, but now it's come back up to the all-time high, and it's taken a while to get there. But I don't really see that it's in a bubble. It's on an upwards logarithmic trend line.
No, but I just conceded that you can't label it Bitcoin as a bubble, because a bubble is when the asset rises higher, which is not justified by the fundamental value. And since Bitcoin doesn't have any fundamental value, it can't be labeled as a bubble. So in that way, I'm conceding.
Sure, but I don't want to do a gotcha. I don't want you to be upset with.
No, I'm not really upset. I mean, I still believe Bitcoin is going to zero, but you still kind of got me there, because, yeah, I mean, if you look at it logically in that way, then then sure, you can label it as an asset bubble.
Right. I'm just so I guess we can concede the proposition then, but I just want to get a graph as well.
But that's the only thing I would like to concede.
Right, but that's we've basically conceded the proposition. But I'm just going to place a
just to make sure everyone knows, my concession is that if an asset bubble definition is that the asset has risen sharply, which is not justified by the fundamental value, then no, Bitcoin can't be labeled as an asset bubble because there is no fundamental value. That's the only concession I'm willing to make.
Right, I just pasted a graph there that I've just taken from my TradingView account of Bitcoin, and you can see I've drawn a logarithmic yellow line from, I don't know when that is, about 2012 or something, up until the present day, and you can see that we've had this logarithmic support line. It's been a very, very, very smooth trend. There's been like little booms and busts and exuberance along the way.
What is the time period for that? Like how many months?
Yeah, this is the entirety of recorded Bitcoin. So this is like the last decade. The last decade.
The last decade.
Yeah, this is the last decade
of Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's with a logarithmic scale.
No, so it's like averaged out.
It's not averaged out. Weekly candles on a logarithmic scale over a decade.
Okay.
So we can see that the price has very smoothly, consistently increased over the last decade. If you look at a linear graph, like I'm assuming that's from Google or something, that's a linear graph, then you're going to see huge spikes. But I can do that with almost any stock. I can do that with Tesla. I can do that with any stock. And if you look at a linear graph of anything, you're going to get a misleading perspective. You need to look at a logarithmic chart in order to see the true fluctuations. Because if something goes from 1 cent to $20,000, most of the chart is just going to be like on the zero axis. Like it's just going to be flat on the horizontal axis.
Yeah, like you see with the graph I sent from Google.
Yeah, exactly. It's just you're not going to see anything, and it's just going to lift off, and then you can see this huge lift off. But if you look on a logarithmic perspective, you can just see that with this yellow line has stayed very, very consistently.
It looks like the growth have stalled compared to the beginning.
Well, it's logarithmic. If it grew as a straight line, then it would be more crazy than it is. Like if you bought $1,000 worth of Bitcoin in 2011 or something, how much would you have now?
Like millions.
Yeah, you'd have 20 million. If you bought $1,000 of Bitcoin back in 2011, you'd have at least 20 million, I think. So as a storage of wealth, it's been very good. In fact, very few people, actually, I think almost no one has lost money on Bitcoin if they've held it on the long term. It's almost impossible that anyone has lost any money at all if they haven't sold it yet. If you bought Bitcoin at any time in the history of Bitcoin, you have not lost money because it's almost at the all-time high right now. So it's impossible that you lost money. In fact,
impossible.
Almost impossible unless you bought it like yesterday or like at the absolute top in, when was it, 2018, December or something like that, or January 2009. I can't remember.
But that goes back to the argument I made in the beginning, which, I mean, if you're taking the graph of the Nasdaq index from 1990 to 1999, you would have said that it would be a great storage of value because it's almost consistently going up. But if you just skip forward 2 more years, it would have gone down dramatically. So that's why I would like to say that the reason why I did this debate is because I think the it's absurd that people would put their money in Bitcoin based on the belief that they would earn their money back.
Well, yeah, I think most people, as I say, almost nobody. It's been almost impossible to lose money on Bitcoin unless you try to take.
Again, if you bought the Nasdaq 100 in 1990 and it was 1999, it would also have been impossible to lose money.
Right. Well, I'll just get the US 30 up here. Hold on.
I mean, I'll just get the Nasdaq
Well,
index.
this is the Dow, not the Nasdaq. But if we look at I'll get the S&P 5. On the S&P, when did you say 1990?
No, I said the Nasdaq.
Well, the S&P and the Nasdaq have got quite a strong correlation. The Nasdaq, the Dow, and the S&P are all sort of quite. But I'll get the Nasdaq up. Hold on.
You can see if you have bought in the 80s and then you were in the late 1990s, it would have been almost impossible. But I'll just find a better graph.
My ticker on TradingView doesn't go that far back, unfortunately. But yeah, I know what you're saying. There's boom and bust cycles of most markets, especially the stock markets. How individual companies can go to zero, but the indexes don't generally go to zero. The major indexes have never gone to zero, and over time, on average, they tend to go up. So if you bought the Nasdaq or the S&P or the Dow or any of these major indexes in the 90s, you would have far more money now than you did then. But the same.
Would you?
No, you would. Like, I don't think any index is lower now than it is.
Yeah, but it's adjusted for inflation.
Adjusted for inflation.
I mean, if you had $100 in 1900, invested it, and that would be $200 that you would have lost money because the purchasing power of those money would have been dramatically lost compared to the increase in how much you would have made.
Right, well, you can argue that with some certain date, if you would have bought on some certain date with some certain index and to some certain time, adjusted for inflation, pegged to the gold standard, you can make some argument for something like that. But we're talking about Bitcoin here. And Bitcoin, if you'd bought at any point in the history of Bitcoin, it's almost impossible that you would have not made more money if you sell
Yes,
today.
I mean that is true, but Bitcoin has only existed for 13 years.
Right, but
which is surprisingly low, taken into consideration of most other financial assets.
I agree, it's quite new.
Yeah, I mean,
doesn't mean it's
if you make a company and after 5 years it's consistently gone up, you say, hey, if you're in this company, it would have been impossible to lose money. If it goes bankrupt the next year, well, okay, then you would have made money until the day that it went bankrupt.
Yeah.
So if you
there's no evidence that Bitcoin is going to zero. There's actually evidence to say that if Bitcoin drops,
there's no evidence that it's going to 1 million, which many people are now saying.
Well, this is the point. There's no evidence. There's no evidence it's going to 1 million. There's no evidence it's going to zero. There's just no evidence of any price prediction because all it is a price prediction. You're trying.
Well, but there is reason to believe that Bitcoin is eventually going to something not minus 0, but close to 0, because all of bubbles have eventually burst.
It's almost a fact that all currencies are going to zero, given a long enough time. In fact, the universe is going to go to zero. The heat death of the universe is going to kick in at some point, and then everything will pretty much be zero on every detectable reading. So at some point, everything's going to zero, regardless of what it is. The life on Earth is going to go to zero at some point. But if we're talking about within our lifetimes, if Bitcoin is a good...
Yeah, I'm not even talking about within our lifetime. I mean, it's going to zero before my grandma's going to die. Or close to zero.
Well, that's just a crazy speculation, not backed up by anything.
The only people who are making speculations buying into Bitcoin would then with the idea that they're going to see it go up 10 times or 100 times.
Well, I bought Stellar Lumens. I think I bought Stellar Lumens about September 2017, and it went up something like 30x, or it was some incredible gain.
How
And
much did you invest? Just out of curiosity.
it was a very small amount because I didn't know what stellar lumens was at the time. And this is the thing, you don't have a crystal ball, so I think it was only a few hundred euros. It was very small, but it went up some incredible amount. But then I didn't cash out at the top because, of course, not only did I not know how much it would have went up, I didn't know when it would have crashed. I didn't know how much it would have crashed. I didn't know. I've still got the money left in. So actually, at one point, it was quite a sizable amount, and then it shrank down. I think it lost something like 98% of
Now,
its
on
value.
a
Ridiculous.
side note here, never invest in something you don't understand.
Well, why? I don't care. Like, my motto is never invest money you don't want to lose. That's my motto. That's why I invested in, for example, Stellar Lumens, and I just put a
What
bit of
was your
money.
motto? Never invest.
My motto is never invest any money you don't want to lose.
Yeah, never invest any money you don't want to use. That's a good rule. But when you invest, only invest in something you understand, a company you understand. I mean,
Well,
you need to
why?
understand what they're selling and the fundamentals of it.
Why? I don't care. I don't understand Bitcoin. I don't understand any of it. I have more money there than what I put in. Happy days. Why do I need to understand it?
I mean, sure, if your intention is just to invest just for fun, then it doesn't really matter, I guess.
Yeah, that was my intention. But anyway, my laptop battery is getting low and it's getting late. We should wrap it up now. As far as I'm aware,
It's really an investment.
well, as far as I'm aware, the debate proposition is conjunction of three things. I'm pretty sure we've got a concession on at least one, if not two. That is the bubble.
No, I'm only.
one.
Yeah, and I made the concession
Right.
very clear that you can't label it as an asset bubble because that would require it to have fundamentals which it don't have. If you go out of the definition you found on the internet. I mean, if I didn't want to concede, we'd have to change the definition of an asset bubble.
Right. And again, I don't want to do like a gotcha or anything on the definition. Like, I think my point's been very clear that you need foresight, you need a crystal ball in order to call something as a bubble right now. You can only call something as a bubble in retrospect. And in terms of you
No,
shouldn't buy it,
I disagree on that.
well, unless there's an underlying value which you can point to say a tulip is only worth X because I can grow one, then there's no way that you could possibly say that Bitcoin has this particular value and it will go back to this, it will revert back to this particular value given time because it's currently in a bubble. There's no way that you can say that.
Yeah, I agree that applies to cryptocurrencies, but that wouldn't apply to stocks, bonds, and real estate.
Right, but I
Would
feel
you
like
agree?
we have
Would you agree on
concession
that?
on that
Would
point.
you agree on that? That wouldn't apply to those assets.
Well, a bond, governments have failed to honor bonds before. Like a bond is just
Yeah,
an agreement
risk
to.
is priced into a bond.
Right, that's why you get shit returns on first world.
Yeah, that's why you get shit returns on American bonds, negative rate on Danish bonds, and double-digit rate on African bonds.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but the reason why you get a good return on African bonds is because the Congo might turn around and not honor
the
your
risk
bond.
is priced into the asset.
Yeah, of course. So that's what I'm saying. I don't even know what your point is. Bitcoin can go to zero. A government bond can go to zero. A stock can go to zero. fiat currency can go to zero. The Zimbabwean dollar isn't worth very much these days, apart from a souvenir sort of value on eBay. Everything can go to
My
zero.
point was to make it clear that the value of Bitcoin is not justified in any way.
It is justified. It's justified by the market price and the rarity of the digital asset. Just because you have a problem with digitalness, it doesn't mean anything, because most of the assets nowadays um, are on computers anyway. So all of the government bonds, it doesn't really matter about the piece of paper if it's not on the computer. So I
It's
feel like
not
we're going around in
it's
circles.
not justified. It's not justified just because there's a demand for it. That just makes sense why it has a higher price.
We're going around in circles. I got concession on the asset bubble. I don't think you want to concede, but I think in part you tacitly conceded that if I wanted to gamble in Bitcoin, for example, because it was fun, then there's no reason why I shouldn't do that. So you've conceded that bit. I'm not interested
No,
in arguing about the future money, because that's not something that I even care about arguing for anyway. As it's a conjunction of three different statements, and I've proven at least one to be false, you've failed to establish the debate proposition. So I'm just going to have to leave it there, because my battery is running out on my laptop, and I feel like we're now just heading around in circles. So
well,
that
yeah.
would be my
So
closing
I
statement.
would like to say one last thing, that
Sure, but that's my
my
closing
opinion
statement.
hasn't changed. Yeah,
Sure,
thanks for the
you
day.
can go
But
ahead.
my opinion hasn't changed on the subject. But because I labeled my proposition wrong, you were able to dismantle it slowly.
Sure, I guess that's what the goal of the debate was to do, to prove the negation of the proposition, or to fail to make it so that you failed to establish the debate proposition, which I feel like I've demonstrated this evening. But
Yeah, you did, you.
I don't. Yeah, if I haven't changed your mind, then that's fine. I don't think you should invest in any asset you don't want to invest in. But I don't think the fact that you just assert that it's going to zero, I just don't. You seem to have
No,
some
not
crystal ball that
necessarily
I don't have.
zero, but close to it.
Right, I just don't have access to the same crystal ball. But I guess that's the end of the debate then. It was very nice talking to you this evening about financial stuff, economics and markets and crypto. It's always like discussing those fun things. And I guess I'm not sure what we want to do here. Maybe Stone or Therapist can decide whether that constitutes a concession or whether we want to go to voting.